The CEO of messaging app Telegram, Pavel Durov, has officially been charged with a wide range of crimes related to enabling so-called illegal activity on the app. He was also barred from leaving France pending further investigation. If convicted, Durov's sentence could be up to 10 years in prison. Now, to be specific, the French authorities have charged Durov with alleged complicity in crimes including drug trafficking, fraud, the distribution of child pornography, refusing to cooperate with law enforcement. The Paris prosecutor said Durov was ordered to pay bail of 5 million euros. He was released from custody, but still must check in at a police station twice a week. The prosecutor also reiterated Telegram has played a role, she says, in multiple criminal cases in France tied to child sexual abuse, online hate crimes, and drug trafficking, and has shown a, quote, near total absence of response to requests for law enforcement cooperation. She added that legal authorities in other European countries have shared the same observation. Durov's lawyers say to French media, quote, it's totally absurd to think the person in charge of a social network could be implicated in criminal acts that don't concern him directly or indirectly. And this, I have to say, really goes to the fundamental disconnect between Europe and the U.S. that I talked about a little bit in my radar today, Jessica. This is exactly why we have Section 230 in the U.S. People should watch my radar today if they didn't watch it, but Section 230, which is what the Biden administration threatened to take away from social media companies if they did not police COVID speech more aggressively, is the statute that makes it so the platform itself, the owner of the platform, the company, is not liable for the speech on the platform. You're liable for it if it's your speech, but if you just own the platform, you're not liable. So we have that in the U.S., Europe does not have that, and so here they are trying to hold the CEO, the founder, the creator, accountable in the event that there was illicit activity going on the platform. And I think this is a very bad move, a very slippery slope. Certainly, they can require, as we do in the U.S., the platforms to do more to combat sexual misconduct, underage sexual activity, terrorist activity, and that kind of thing. But that's what they say they're trying to get him for, of complicity in that, again, for just owning the platform where it takes place. That stuff takes place on Facebook too. It takes place on other social media apps. The social media apps do communicate with law enforcement to flag those things. The real issue is wanting to, grapple with the fact that Telegram is going to allow misinformation and hate speech, which the European authorities no longer want.
Yeah, I do appreciate that in Europe, you're not in a situation where you're constantly monitored with an ankle bracelet. Going in and checking in with the police twice a week sounds egregious, but when you realize that the ankle monitor is kind of like being in prison when you're living your regular life in the US, that practice I think is much more regressive than checking in. The reason he's committed a crime aside, just that practice of how they monitor people that they deem to be dangerous. I think checking in with the police, going to the police station and not constantly being watched or listened to or tracked with a monitor is much better psychologically when we think about what kind of impact that has on people. James Kilgore writes a lot about it, is an activist around that. This seems better than that. Of course, the reason he is in prison seems a little bit, or the reason he's being, on probation, checking in with the French authorities twice a week, not so good. That he's, found to be responsible for crimes that other people committed, and that somehow he has to be a police force and be the CEO of this company that's used for communications. What is he supposed to do now? The app's whole thing is they guarantee private encrypted messaging. Now he has to read them all to check for crimes. Now no one's going to use Telegram in France. It negates its original purpose because while the French love to protest, and that's what I use Telegram for, there are other people who just want no one reading their messages, who are not doing anything nefarious or illegal. It is sad, but I think there's a better way to do this. And that's what's lacking here, is there was no mediation process for, maybe we implement some kind of computer program that web scrapes messages. There's a disclosure to users. If you're using X, Y, and Z words, you're not allowed to use the app, but they could come up with code words like many criminals do when they talk about, drug deals. I'm sure this is common in the ring of people who are, doing pedophilia or making exchanges online. But there has to be something, some kind of happy medium between this CEO is now responsible for everyone's crimes instead of just investigating the crimes being committed and getting the actual criminals. And you know what? We're allowed to just do crimes secretly as long as we use certain apps. There has to be something in between.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think Glenn Greenwald made an excellent point on his show the other day when he was talking about this. He said, look, if you can, prosecute, put in prison the owner of the platform because you don't think he cooperated in your investigation enough, I mean, that gives tremendous power to the bureaucrats, to the state, to to encourage the platforms to just censor more of the kind of content they want because they don't want to they don't want to be looked at sideways, be looked at funny by the state. So it's going to make them. It's going to implicitly send a signal to them that if they want to not find themselves on the wrongful side of what I would say is a BS prosecution like this, they better, listen when Terry Breton says, hey, are you policing your site for misinformation? We're looking into this. Free speech is all good and everything, but we think there's a lot of hate speech going on about this Trump character. You might say, okay, yeah, we're going to take that really seriously. We're going to take stuff down because you don't want to be investigated for facilitating child pornography, terrorism, because that's what they can do if they think you're not falling in line with their censorship agenda. So it gives more ability to enforce censorship on the platform. And I think that's really the bigger issue. Yes, I agree there needs to be some involvement of law enforcement on actual criminal stuff like violence and underage sexual materials. We have that in the U.S. Despite Section 230, there's requirements to police that kind of thing. We have copyright law, for instance. Like you can get the platform can get a notification that there's a copyright violation, and they have a certain amount of time to take that down before they become liable. It's not every instance they're instantly responsible for it. They get a takedown period. That's how copyright law generally works, and it actually ends up working pretty well. I think something like that might be a good model for the limited number of areas where we do think there ought to be more policing consistent with free speech understanding or a First Amendment understanding. But this just goes so far and raises the possibility of a dissident, essentially. Someone who fled Russia, someone who is not pro-Vladimir Putin, who thought Russia's authoritarianism was something to escape, ends up getting arrested in France, in the bastion of the Enlightenment, the country of Voltaire, the country that helped invent the free speech understanding on which so much of the West did operate, that is fundamentally baked into the American Revolution and the U.S., the DNA of this country. We inherited it from them, and now they're turning their back on it.
Yeah, I will say Europe and the EU, they don't mess around. Even Interpol, they don't mess around when it comes to any pedophilia, any child pornography. When I was working doing data-driven policy research in policy labs, we worked with a lot of, really skilled computer scientists and data scientists, and they would hack into these live streams that were run by people doing just awful things, live child pornography, because it's less easy to track the files if it's run live on the deep web. And they would hack into and find the location of these people live, and Interpol would come and arrest them. That's all to say they have the technology needed if they really had to say, Telegram, we're going to need to get in here and find people doing X, Y, and Z thing. This is not covered by free speech if you're doing this kind of awful crime. I'm sure the CEO would play ball. And the fact that they're using the reality that the app is used for people committing crimes, doing the worst crimes possible, to just attack the CEO in an effort to, I don't know, have Telegram be taken down, not be as accessible, not be as encrypted. I think it becomes a free speech concern. It initiates as this unreasonable search and seizure or holding someone responsible for someone else's crimes, but it seems like a free speech thing. I think that they could have worked this out in a way where they worked with the CEO of Telegram to investigate those crimes, because the majority of the people using the app are people using it to organize, people who are not committing crimes, people who are protesters that don't want to be tracked in some way, people who have a high risk of being hacked, reporters getting information, and they want to protect their sources and their sources' identities. There's all kinds of positive reasons to use an app like Telegram. But to take it down because that kind of reporting or that kind of protesting is inconvenient for governments like France, That's where it becomes a free speech concern for me, even though it initiates as in the United States a Fourth Amendment concern. And so there has to be a happy medium that's struck in other countries. And I think France will be an example of an extreme scenario that should not be replicated.
More Rising right after this.